So Panera Bread has been in the news recently. There are 2 wrongful death lawsuits that have been filed against Panera Bread for a certain kind of lemonade that they serve in the store. That mango uzu citrus charged lemonade, it contains a really significant amount of caffeine. So by the numbers, a Red Bull contains 111 milligrams of caffeine. I think most people understand that Red Bull has a fairly significant amount of caffeine. It's marketed as an energy drink. This particular brand of lemonade, I actually randomly got the opportunity to have it probably when it first came out. I didn't even know it was new, but I was in the store. The drinks are served fountain style and you get it yourself. And on the left, I remember there were traditional fountains to get soda and seltzer and whatever. And on the right, there was a bunch of different kinds of teas and lemonades. And one of them was this charged lemonade that said it had caffeine in it. I wonder how much caffeine that is. I saw the number and it said it was in the 300s, I think, per serving. So we're talking triple a Red Bull for a glass of this Panera Bread lemonade. So these 2 separate lawsuits, one is in Pennsylvania, I believe, and the other one's in Florida. There's differences in the cases, obviously, but basically each plaintiff had a very negative reaction to the high volume of caffeine that was in the drinks, and they died right after they consumed the drink. So what's interesting about this case, it has a certain wow factor. I've had it brought up to me multiple times, and it's an interesting case to discuss, unfortunately, for these families. It has a lot of different aspects of it that I think people's interests and what the plaintiff's lawyer, so the way that it works is like the families of the people who died contact an attorney who they want to hire to pursue the case, and they have to bring the case forward and litigate it. Panera's position consistently has been that they're not at fault, although they did make changes to their website and I believe have updated the warnings as it relates to the lemonade, the charged lemonade itself. And I think even in most stores, they've now moved that lemonade to behind the counter. You could easily imagine a small child being told by their parents to go get a refill on their drink and going and filling a normal sized cup of lemonade, which actually tasted very sweet. I remember drinking it myself and it went down the hatch very easily. And it brings up a lot of interesting points about how products are marketed, because this ultimately is like a products liability case, which means that Panera was negligent in the way that it disclosed what the risks were associated with the consumption of the product. So it's up to the plaintiff's lawyers to convince the jury or get the jury to see that Panera was negligent in the way that it presented the product to your average consumer who's in the store. So depending on how that story gets told, it can go either way. If the defense presents a good enough argument that reasonable steps were taken and that these people had sort of freak reactions that nobody can really be held responsible for, then there won't be any level of liability. I think the factors that elevate liability likely being imposed on Panera by a jury are the ways the drink itself was advertised and put out and the ridiculously high amount of caffeine that was in a serving. Like we're talking almost 4 times what's in a Red Bull. So that most people understand that both coffee and Red Bull have a significant amount of caffeine in them. So if you're consuming a drink that has 4 times the amount of a Red Bull, which has almost double the amount of caffeine as a cup of coffee, you should know very thoroughly that that's what you're consuming. So the guy in Florida who died after consuming 3 of these lemonades, I've read a bunch of information that said that he had a lot of intellectual disabilities, and so he was sort of limited intellectually in a lot of ways. And this guy was free to just serve himself as much of this lemonade as he could drink. And like I said, it's not like this lemonade had any kind of taste that was off-putting. Like it went down the hatch easily when I drank it. I was thirsty, I remember, when I was drinking it, and it just went down my throat very easily, like, you know, a sweet tea or a sweet lemonade would at a place like Panera or some chain that's like that. With all that being said, I think it's pretty likely that Panera will end up settling the case before it goes to trial. That's usually what ends up happening in cases like this, first of all. And second of all, like it is in the press, is not great for Panera's image. It's not obviously something that they want to have hanging over their head for marketing purposes, and that's going to be a part of the decision to settle or push it all the way to a trial and a verdict. But this is a classic example of how the story gets told dictating the outcome. The girl in Pennsylvania, I think it was in the Philadelphia area, she drank one of these, and within hours of consuming it, she had a heart condition. It's a dark look for Panera and how they are serving up products that are dangerous to certain groups of people who should have a warning. And obviously, like, the other side of the coin in cases like this is where do you draw this line? And that's why with respect to negligence law, there is a lot of play in the joints as far as what is negligence and what is not negligence. And that's why it matters so much the way the story gets told in court from the defense side and the plaintiff side. If the plaintiff side does a good enough job telling a story that shows Panera acted negligently, then the jury is likely to find that they're liable and impose significant damages. If the defense can do a good enough job in presenting the opposite, then they will be found not liable and everybody will go home empty-handed on the plaintiff side. So another aspect of this case that is sort of being told in a lot of the stories that I've seen about it is that Panera has, since these lawsuits have been filed and since these deaths have occurred, taken steps to provide more thorough warnings about the lemonade. So when a company is taking steps to provide warnings after something like this happens, obviously it creates the impression that they're guilty to some extent. They've, I guess, updated their website to say that the charged lemonade contains a significant amount of caffeine. And a lot of the stores, they've taken the lemonade and put it behind the counter, so you have to ask for it, and then, you know, you can have some back and forth with the cashier about how much caffeine's in it, etc. Taking these kinds of steps is what's referred to as a subsequent remedial measure. So that's fancy law talk, which basically means they did something to fix a problem. And doing something to fix a problem could show guilt on the part of a defendant in a case like Panera in this one. However, in a trial setting, you cannot introduce this as evidence of negligence against Panera. You can get it in for a lot of other reasons. There's a bunch of exceptions that are outlined in the rules of evidence, both in federal court and in pretty much every state court I know about, to be able to get it in for different reasons other than directly showing negligence. So it does it without directly doing it. It's kind of one of those fancy little lawyer tricks, but it likely will come in and will be seen by the jury as something that shows Panera knew or should have known that their lemonade was a health hazard to its customers, but they can't technically do it to directly show negligence. So that's just something that I think a lot of people don't directly understand, and it's almost like it's kind of a stupid wrinkle that gets folded in, because most of the time when something like this happens, the evidence ends up coming in anyway under an exception, like Panera taking these steps to guard people or warn people about the lemonade itself. But it's obvious from like a public policy perspective that you wouldn't want somebody like Panera to be punished for taking actions which would protect their customers. So you don't want it to come in for that reason, although it'll come in for other reasons very likely. So that's the Panera wrongful death lawsuits in a nutshell.